So with the promotion point, I think one of the big things that I wanted to highlight was this is really the second of three trips that are part of the This Community Matters grant. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Keith. But you had Jim Thompson come from Iowa. He worked with you on the economic vitality point several months ago. Randy and I are kind of doing the double whammy with the design and promotion, and then Keith will be returning and focusing in on the organization point. Now, all this to kind of say this 4-point model was created in 1977. It was piloted by the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and the goal was building preservation. So they wanted building owners to preserve historic buildings. And the thing that they realized is they couldn't make the argument for building owners to spend the money if the market didn't seem worth it to invest. So what they did almost accidentally is they created the base formula for economic development. They understood that these 4 points were essential in being able to allow a community to cultivate an economy in their community. And we've been watching it for 40 some odd years, and we do know that it works. So the big thing that we want to focus in on this promotion point is we want to talk about there are 3 very simple things that we focus in on with promotion. We create retail promotions, we program special events, and then we cultivate a positive image. Okay? Those are all pretty simple. I'm going to do these kind of in reverse. Let's start with cultivate a positive image. They call this image development activities. This is anything that is either reinforcing positives or trying to combat negative perceptions. Okay? So Randy and I worked in a community in California, and everybody was like, nobody ever walks here. And I think I'll show it in a second. And as we walked around, we saw people, walking with strollers. Oh, it's not safe. It's not safe. Well, if it's not safe, why are there so many people out and about? You can do all kinds of things in the image building category. This is a really, really, at the time was a poorly thought of neighborhood in Baltimore called Waverly. It was pretty sketchy, I'll be honest. But one of the things that we realized was there wasn't any way that people that lived in Waverly to show that they were proud of living in Waverly. So even as they were starting to get themselves together, they were like, we're changing the community, but how are other people going to know about it? So they went out, they launched a whole series of products. They actually designed retro style t-shirts. Saw the same thing in Niles, Michigan, where they're going through. And I think one of the big lessons I always try to reinforce to folks is when you're creating these items, you don't want to create car wash t-shirts. Okay, the car wash t-shirts are the ones that are so ugly. They've got like 800 logos on the back, and you only wear them when you paint or cut the grass. You want to create things that people actually want to wear in public and show other people, hey, I'm proud, this is my community. Being able to create things that highlight what you have to offer, the events that you put on, places you have to eat, places you have to dine. Look, I get it. You're small. Don't have a ton of restaurants. Don't have a ton of shops. But you're quaint, and you can tell those stories. Like, don't feel like you don't have to say anything just because you're small. You still have a story to tell. Going through and owning the perception, there is nothing worse than those giant realtor for rent signs being the only way that you're saying that a property is available. I'll never forget, in my hometown, there was this. You're walking down the sidewalk, and there's a set of stairs that went down to an underground space. And the realtor had a sign that they put out on the sidewalk. They said, imagine what this could be. Restaurant, coffee shop, Cheers bar, ? Because you had to walk downstairs to get to Cheers. And it was like, wow, it actually makes you stop and think. Being able to take this whole concept of the building's not empty, it's full of opportunity. I will say, really, really pleased to not hear anybody complain about parking yesterday. We truly, truly hope that in the near future, you all will have a parking problem. That is the goal of every Main Street community, is to create a parking problem. Right now, if anybody complains about parking, it is because they are lazy. And I think we can all agree on that, right? But one of the big things, and I left this in here on purpose because as stewards of the community's self-esteem, this is a really good illustration of problem solving. What typically happens in most downtowns? A customer comes to town, they get frustrated because they can't park right in front of the business they want to go to. They drive around a couple times, they find a spot, they get out, they walk the block that they didn't want to have to walk, they go into the business they plan to go into, and then complain to the business owner. So technically the system worked perfectly, right? Parking was there, they parked, they got in, and they complained about it. What is the business owner supposed to say to them? We arm them with no response. So with no response, they're left only to commiserate with the complaint. This simple gesture of a business card showing where your parking exists, for a $100 investment, you can create a positive response to that interaction, and you can now curb the whole conversation. Because in most communities, what happens is somebody comes in, complains about parking, merchant agrees, then merchant, they're typically irritated all the time anyway, and they're like, we need more parking. So what are we going to do? Let's buy a historic building and knock it down, or let's build a parking garage at an average of $22,000 a space, when all we really needed is spend $100 on business cards saying, hey, you can park. Same thing, we worked in downtown State College, Pennsylvania. They had all these parking garages and nobody parked in them. So what they started to do was, instead of just giving tickets, they started with a courtesy ticket. When somebody would overstay in a parking meter, they would put this on their window and say, hey, apparently you really like it here because you stayed longer than you were supposed to. Next time you come, why don't you take advantage of our parking garage and you can stay as long as you'd like. They also got real aggressive and said there's nowhere to park downtown except for our 2,037 spaces. So, it's okay to be a little, tongue-in-cheek. No one walks there, San Pedro, California, convinced nobody was walking around. Sometimes you really do have to be straight up. I mean, there are going to be people, as you try to bring that positive message to the marketplace about Rockaway Beach, there will be that very small group of naysayers that are going to try to undermine every bit of positivity that you project. So every now and then, just embrace it and make it seem silly. Randy and I both have worked in a community, Sumter, South Carolina. Sumter, I met with the police chief. At the time, Sumter had the fifth highest percentage the fifth highest murder rate in the country per capita. But when I met with the police chief, they were like, well, I know that sounds bad, but the weird thing is it's only the bad people killing each other. It's like, well,
hard to market.
I'm like, can't really work too much with that. But one of the things that was interesting was they had kind of gotten this nickname, Merc City, like Mercenary City. This is not a positive nickname. So what we actually did was we designed a t-shirt. It looked like this horrible 1980s t-shirt. It said Merc across it. And it said, make everything rad and cool. Like, it was lame on purpose. And essentially what we did was we made the phrase uncool to use. Kind of like how, your mom comes into a party and then all of a sudden nothing fun happens after that. That's exactly what we did. So being able to understand what the negatives are and how you can diffuse those through vibrancy, through promotion, through messaging. Now we talk about the special events. The special events is the category that Main Street gets known for the most, but it's also the one that I caution Main Street organizations against, because this is the place where you churn and burn volunteers. And this is the place where you overextend yourself. This is the world of festivals, the big giant events that take months to promote, and they're great, but you don't want to go overboard. Want to share a couple ideas that we came up with communities. We worked in Athens, Alabama, and we came up with the Athens Grease Festival, a celebration of all things deep fried. Little play on words there. So, you know, Grease like Grease, right? They loved it. They do all kinds of stuff. They do a toga 5K. They, you know, have kings and queens. They do all these different parades and stuff. But still, it is very much a celebration of fried food. And in fact, it was so cool that when you start to, you never really know what press coverage will be. They had a regional health blogger who, as soon as you find out that a health blogger is writing about a fried food festival, you're like, oh God, this is not going to go well. And it was amazing the angle that the health blogger took. She was like, these are the reasons why you eat healthy. So that when there are events like this, you can enjoy yourself and enjoy and explore food. Such an interesting angle to take on it. So, you know, being able to have things that are going to bring the community together and make organizations money. Art fields, we heard Randy talk about celebration of the arts there in Lake City. Tupelo does the Elvis Festival, giant concert. Again, major fundraiser for the organization, bankrolls their Main Street program for the year. Buskers in the Berg, this is Ellensburg, Washington. Celebration of street artists and bringing the streets to life. A lot of communities have giant 4th of July events. You know, these can be super expensive when you start to look at fireworks. So are these events coming in and bringing you revenue? Trick or treat events. I think a lot of times we miscategorize these and think that these are good for the businesses. It's not. This is a gift to the community. It doesn't make them wrong. It just means you got to make sure you know what you're doing. Nothing like having hundreds of small children, you know, with masks partially constricting their eyesight, walking through all your merchandise, asking for free things. So got to make sure that you've got that positioned the right way. And then any of your holiday activities, tree lightings and that kind of stuff. Those are all the things that there are special activities. They're showing that crowds can be gathered in your community. They are gifts to the community and they're cultivating that market. But then that final category is the creating the retail promotions. These are the things that you do to help your businesses and restaurants to survive. Now, when you start to look at this, I want to be really, really mindful and I want to be really realistic with you all. Not sure exactly what all Jim Thompson shared with you. I did a really quick search of some of the economic circumstances here. I did a 10-minute drive time from the bar, just because that was easy to find the address. You said it was the gathering spot, so we went from there. You've got a little less than 5,000 people, 4,900 people that live in that drive time. There's some pretty significant, for that population, is a decent buying power. And there actually are a lot of really good community-oriented categories where you're missing, you're leaking money. There's enough money that exists now in that 10-minute drive time that's going elsewhere to easily absorb a couple more restaurants, local restaurants. That's good news. And there definitely is enough money to be able to capture a couple of appropriate downtown and scaled businesses, especially if it's a savvy business owner that can layer a couple different business categories together. Okay? So I'm going to see if I can show you. I tell you what, I'll break everything if I get out of this. I ran the full report and saved it as a PDF. And what it actually does is it looks at every single retail-oriented tax code and shows how much the consumers in that 10-minute drive time spend versus how much the stores make and then what the leakage or the gain is. So I'll share that with you, and I know that that's going to layer on top of what Jim did.
Yeah, and we'd like to copy when we were here. So if someone has it, I also have an electronic version.
I,
Did you
I,
get that out of Maestro?
no, that comes out of, there are two main data sources there. One's called Esri, the other's called Claritas. Jim Thompson uses Esri. I use Claritas. So the data will be a little bit different. It'd be nice for you to see both. Mayor, I'll go through it real quick and I will highlight what I think is a logical kind of short list for you guys to focus on. Yes, sir.
Question, when you mentioned the 10-minute drive time,
Mhm.
explain that to me. What do you mean?
Okay, so what this literally does is it goes through and it analyzes the transportation infrastructure and figures out all of the population that can leave their home and get here in a 10-minute drive. And I always do drive times instead of doing mile radius because, perfect example, you have a river and the people directly across this river, it's not taking, like it takes them more than 10 minutes to get here. So it's, the drive time is a better way for us to understand the realistic travel patterns. And the reason you can set whatever drive time you want, 10-minute is a pretty standard in the retail industry. A lot of times they'll do a 10, 20, 30. Sometimes they'll do a 5, 10, 15. So it was the one that made sense for us just to kind of look at from a base. So with this particular category, these are events that you're doing to try to help the business directly. We came up with this fun one in Fairmont, West Virginia, said to be the birthplace of Mother's Day. Now, there are probably 8 communities that say that. But what we did was we came up with an event, a retail promotion the Saturday before Mother's Day. We had 12 downtown businesses that participated. Local florists worked with them, provided each one of them a separate flower. As people went around to each one, they got a free flower and then shopped. And by the end of it, they saw 12 businesses. They got a free bouquet of flowers and hopefully ended up buying things to save Mother's Day. So it's those multiple stop, getting them in to see what a business might have, and then try to cultivate the environment of actually spending. So it's an event that makes money. We see the same format with things like art walks where you display whether it's musicians, whether it's painters painting live, whether it's art exhibits in the buildings. Everybody loves the wine walks where you're doing small wine tastings or craft beer tastings, and going store to store with that. Restaurant weeks, again, small community. You don't have a lot of all this kind of stuff, but you can find the essence of this and you can figure out those ways to get people in and get them to explore. Then that final idea of the extended hours, okay? You have vacancy. You know you're going to have conversations about recruiting people to come and work here, start a business here. The thing that we don't need them to do is start a business and have it close in 4 months. And the fact is, if you have about 400 residents, 300 some odd people that live here that have jobs. The overwhelming majority of those are leaving every day to go to work. So if they're gone by 7:30 and they don't return until 5:45 or 6, if your retail establishment is open from 10 to 5, all of your customers are unemployed. Unemployed customers aren't necessarily the best customers because they don't know.
It's like Sunday. Everybody's here on Sunday, but everything's closed on Sunday.
Exactly. So being able to really, as you're having those conversations with prospects, setting the expectation that the expectation does not have to be you need to stay open late every single night. But as you move forward, wouldn't it be amazing if everybody in town was open a couple hours late on the same night so that there was a motivation and a general market understanding that I can go on Thursdays or I can go on the third Thursday? Yes, ma'am.
I have to say that I came from a small town called Rock Valley, Iowa,
Mm-hmm.
and that is exactly what they do on a Thursday night, and that is one bustling town on Thursday night.
Yep.
Yeah, all people come for food, all the shops are open.
Absolutely. And it's a long, tedious process because I use this phrase often. You are reprogramming retail behavior. This isn't Field of Dreams. You can't just open and they will show up. This is truly reprogramming. So, what I often try to recommend is I try to recommend a 3-year training process. First year, you're doing one night a month. That's why everybody always lands on the alliteration. They love their third Thursdays, first Fridays, second Saturdays. That's the way that it works. But what you do is you start to have that one night a month where you can celebrate and bring people back in. And then after you start to get some good understanding on, say, third Thursday, you try to take that third Thursday to every Thursday. Because that's the easiest path. That's the path of least resistance. If you have proven that third Thursdays work, the easiest place to go next is every Thursday. I think a lot of times people were like, well, third Thursday worked, so let's do first Friday now. It's like, no, too many, that's too many specialties. So you're trying to incrementally grow your validity. The other thing is, if you know that you're a community that has a dramatic seasonal shift in customer behavior, summer season is a lot heavier than your winter or vice versa, then you can absolutely craft these extended campaigns around the known season. Does that make sense?
And the thing of it is here that the churches here already do that. Like
Okay.
Wednesday night is Awana night.
Gotcha.
Awana. That's a program for kids
Mm-hmm.
in the Baptist church. So the Baptist churches have Awana on Thursday or on Wednesday night.
Right.
Has anybody been to White Street Walk in Eureka?
Mm.
And then they used to do a thing on, in the month of. So, and I remember we did it one time, we had chocolate covered strawberries, we had wine,
Right.
every single business had something, it was like a big party.
Absolutely.
Walk up and down.
Absolutely.
And they had music, out there, and it's just amazing.
Right. Right. So the other thing I wanted to hit on as it related to the events itself is I always like to remind us of this, because whenever you talk to a Main Street organization, especially a promotion committee, the thing that they will always say is, we need volunteers. And what happens in the Main Street world is you'll ask for volunteers for an event. You need somebody to haul garbage bags. They'll say, I'll be there. When do you need me? I need you at 1. They show up at 1 and you're like, oh my God, you're amazing. Will you be on the board? It's this like, there's no subtlety in the Main Street world. It's like you show up when you say you're going to show up. We want you for everything. In the world of promotions, always remember there are 3 different types. You've got your idea makers, you've got your planners, and your doers. Don't ever mistake overloading your committee simply because you always need doers. And there's no better way to burn out your planners than forcing them to be doers. So understanding the different roles, understanding that it is absolutely okay for community organizations to potentially fill some of those doer gaps. I've got 2 kids in Scouts. It is amazing what that Scout troop will do for a $100 donation. They are trying to buy new tents, and they will get 12 boys out to work for 2 hours and for $100. That's good money. That's good workforce. So that's a really, really important lesson. Now from there, I'm going to jump into a by slightly, I mean completely different topic as it relates to Main Street. And it's really the communication side of promotion. It's telling the story of what Main Street is, what the movement is, what the organization is, and what you're doing. Now, having done this for almost 20 years and worked with all these Main Street communities, the thing that we have discovered is every single Main Street community shares the same 5 audiences. You have donors, owners, public, volunteers, and government. So literally in every single community, they are all fighting the same challenges. Now it's going to be different. Some have, a lot of money coming at them. Others are begging and scraping for every single dollar they get. Some have great relationship with their business owners. Others have business owner associations because they're irritated at how little they think the Main Street is doing. The public is a funny one. The public is really, those are our citizens. Those are our customers. Those are our event goers. They're the ones that also can be the we call them the boxer short commenters, you know, the ones that sit in their underwear and comment online about how everything you do is stupid. You got your volunteers, you know, that's your board members, your committee members. That's people that are willing to donate design services. That's the in-kind sponsorships or donations. And then, of course, your government, you know, your elected officials, your city staff. One of the things that I want you to remember as you think about these 5 audiences is we in the Main Street world need to be really good at talking about why we're doing things. If you have ever heard of Simon Sinek, he wrote this great book called It Starts With Why. We are good at telling people what we do, focusing in on revitalizing the community. How are we doing it? We're going to, you know, give out grants, or we're going to do this, or we're going to do that. But we never really get into why. Why is Rockaway Beach worth preserving? Why are these buildings worth investing in? Why should these sidewalks across the street be enhanced? Like, it seems simple, and I guess in the perfect world, you would want the public to already know that. But remember, you really are driving a movement. I mean, do you live in a community that has absolutely no naysayers? Nope. You know that you do. So you know you've got those naysayers. So talking about the why is very, very important. The why is where the emotions lie. And I think that's part of the reason that we've buried this. We've decided that emotions aren't important and data is the way to win arguments. Well, this is 2019, folks. Data doesn't win arguments. In fact, data triggers skepticism. So, give you a couple examples as it relates to Main Street. First of all, what are we doing? Preservation. How are we doing that? Through facade grants. Why? Because we believe that there is no place on the planet that has our buildings, and these buildings tell
Our
stories.
history too.
Exactly.
History is what's the cool thing about Rockaway.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's how you start with that why. What are we doing? We're creating vibrancy. How are we doing that? Through our events and festivals. Why? Because I know somebody who went to one of our events, they fell in love with downtown, and then they went and bought a building and started a business. That's why we're doing this. Now, one of the other things that I always try to preach about is this idea that if you've ever been on a board for anything, you've probably been through one of those lovely mission statement processes. You know, the multiple months where you analyze each and every word, and then you end up with such a consensus-based document, but it was also so painful to create that you spread it to everybody and don't realize that that actually is an internal document. That mission statement really is the banks of your river. It's the thing that you measure yourself against to make sure that you're staying on task. So what we did is we created this Mad Lib that lets you go through and figure out why you do this. Why are you involved in Main Street? Why are you giving time to this? And the thing is, you don't want every board member to have the same thing. I'll share it with you, Rex, so don't worry. I'm going to give you all this stuff so you can dig into it. But literally, you know, everybody has a different reason why they do it. And that's what's interesting about it. So going through that simple process, you could literally do this at a board meeting. You could spend 5 minutes and then everybody could walk away with their own elevator speech. And you don't have to have one. It's about having your own. So then as we start to get a little complicated, and if you do not like charts and, you know, they give you the heebie-jeebies, I get it. I'm a visual thinker. We're going to share with you some resources like this. All this simply does is this thinks about different forms of communication that the organization has access to and what audiences might be relevant to communicate to over the course of the year. And this is just a sample. We got Facebook and Instagram up top, so the top 2 rows are social media. They're always communicating to the public, which is our purple. What we're showing here, January, February, we're seeing those dark blue blocks. That's oriented at our business owners. Because if you ever owned a business, you know that when January 1st hits, everybody's depressed and nobody spends money. So they're in the doldrums. and you as an organization can help them along by telling their story, kind of do testimonials, do spotlights on them during January and February. Then as you start to move in March and April, people start to get cabin fever, so maybe your message moves more to volunteer recruitment and starting to prime the pump for some of your doers on your events. As you go through the summer season, maybe you do have a couple of events in a row. So as you're doing those events, you're asking people to give donations, text message donations during events. If you think this is fun, why don't you help us do more events here in the community? And then you move into your early pre-holiday season and you start to promote the businesses again, but now instead of promoting the owners, you're promoting the products. So just getting strategic with that. Again, remember this, order matters. Always start with the why, start with emotions before data. One of my favorite quotes, no one ever marched on Washington because of a pie chart. So very important to remember, it is absolutely okay to be able to lead with those emotions because your emotions are yours. When you make it personal, people can't contradict that. And once you make it personal, you've opened the door to talk about your data. So then from there, I'm going to hit on the final section, and this is the branding. This is kind of the storytelling behind both the organization and the community. I like to start with the simple question, why do we brand? This is a buzzword that really kind of started to emerge in the early 2000s, late 1990s, early 2000s. And I've got an illustration of why we kind of do this. And I use the scenario of we're celebrating a kid's birthday. So, in the 40s, we would have gone to the local grocer, we would have bought flour, eggs, and sugar and gone home and made a cake, spent about 50 cents. By the 60s, we're going to that local grocer. We're now buying a box mix, spending about $2. By the 80s, we're going to the chain grocery store and getting those weird quarter sheet cakes with the little plastic clown heads. I still don't understand, but you know what I'm talking about. They were freaky. I'm spending about $10. Now, we're spending $500 and renting Fortnite trailers and we're going over the top. Well, this kind of illustrates this evolution from a raw material economy into a product economy, service economy, and now we're buried in the middle of this experience economy. And the fact that the consumer is so focused on experience is exactly the reason why branding has become a topic. So my definition is branding is the discovery and preservation of a community's personality. This is a dramatically different process than corporate branding. Because in corporate branding, you have this very funny concept called control. In communities, you control nothing. You brand by inspiration. You brand with the hopes that your partners will participate. You have no ability to force behavior or force language. When Nations Bank became Bank of America, they literally declared, on this day, you throw everything away that says Nations Bank. And from here on out, we are Bank of America. You know that polo shirt we gave you 3 months ago? Do not ever wear that to work again. We don't do that in communities. We can't. So we've got to be able to lead through that inspiration. The goal here is to create brand equity, create value. What is brand equity? Here's an example. Mercedes SUV, right? How much does this car cost? 60, 40, right? You can probably smell it, right? Smells like leather, right? Well, what happens though when you find out that this Mercedes is actually a Kia? How much is it worth now? Not 60, right? Not 60. Same car. It's the exact same car. But guess what? When you pull up to a stoplight in a Mercedes, the people around you think differently than when you pull up in a Kia. Communities can leverage that same value. One of the things that I feel like we heard loud and clear yesterday is Rockaway Beach has brand equity. There is value to your name that is driven through past experience and nostalgia. And for the most part, even though we talked a little bit about some of the typical, siblings in the family dynamic here in the county, for the most part, there are far more people rooting for you than actively rooting against you. So that's a really, really good place to start. But that understanding that part of the reason we're doing this is to create that value behind your name. Now, I've been doing it for almost 20 years, and I have figured out that to be an expert, you have to come up with rules, right? So these are my 5 rules of branding. My first rule is called the khaki rule: say no to design by committee. This typically happens in communities. They always want to have community input. Community input's good, but it needs to happen on the front end of the process, not after you've created everything and say, hey, we worked really hard. We've got this really great system. What do you think? That's the wrong way to get input. It would be like if all of us sat around the table and said, okay, we're going to come up with one and only one outfit that we're all going to wear for the rest of our lives. What are we going to look like? We're going to look like we work at Best Buy. We're going to land in khaki pants and some sort of solid color, polo shirt, and then it's all going to be done. So a great example of this, we worked in Kittitas County, Washington. This is the county just east of Snoqualmie Pass. This is the first place where the clouds and gray of Seattle stop, and you're able to see the sun again. So we came up with this very simple kind of icon, this idea of live life in color, Kittitas County, and then the committee got a hold of it. And so the first thing they said is, well, people don't know where Kittitas County is. So maybe the logo should be a map of the state, and then, we're a county, so we need to be really fair. We have to make sure that we have the name of every community in there. And then with each committee iteration, it got worse and worse and worse. And finally, it got to this, and somebody on the committee was like, I'm not sure if y'all realize it or not, but that looks really horrible. And finally, it hit, and they went back to this. Being mindful that when your goal is to stick out from a crowd and to carve your place in the market, consensus is not going to be the best tool to disrupt the market's perception of you. So sometimes branding is going to make people feel a little bit uncomfortable. It does not mean that it needs to be controversial. Doesn't mean that it has to be a completely different personality. It still needs to be true to who you are. But being able to have something that really works and is a little bit on the edge and not so tame. Rule number 2, say no to design competitions. These never end well, folks. This is a logo from a community in India that was designed through a design contest. This pretty much captures how that works. They do win points for thoroughness. They included pretty much everything, right? The other thing that we try to do in communities too often is we try to be clever. And cleverness takes us to things like La Crosse, Kansas, the barbed wire capital of the world. They were trying to say something that nobody else could say, and they ended up saying something that nobody else wants to say, right? That's not exactly the most inviting, but it gets better. Gas, Kansas, don't pass gas, stop and enjoy it. So yes, this community has decided to couch their economic future on a fart joke. We go to Rex's home state of Oklahoma with Hooker, Oklahoma. It's a location, not a vocation. Now, you would think that is all a joke, except for the fact that their local sports teams are the Horny Toads, and their senior center sells once a hooker, always a hooker t-shirts as a fundraiser, right? So, exactly. Like, looks a little bit like you, Rex. But then the worst that I've come across, Severance, Colorado, where the geese fly and the bulls cry. I had no clue what that meant. I made an assumption when I saw this that was a reference to the beef slaughter industry. I know there's a lot of ranches in that particular part of Colorado, and I was like, maybe that's some sort of reference to beef slaughter. And then I found out that they're the home of Bruce's Bar, that's known for their Rocky Mountain oysters. And if you haven't had Rocky Mountain oysters, they are bull testicles. So literally, this community has decided that the main thing that they're going to share is consuming bull testicles. again, always want to make sure to not go so far down the road. In fact, I'll go so far as to say I completely disagree with the people who say your goal when branding is to find a statement that nobody else can make. I would actually say that in the world of telling stories about communities, people are looking for ways they can connect. They're actually looking for things that are familiar to them. So playing off of the nostalgia that you have and the nostalgia that is universal to people, even those people who have never been here before. I think that's part of the reason that Randy and I like it here so much is as we go through, it automatically evokes all of these magical communities that we've discovered that were, for some reason, they had a magnetic force that drew people there, and together they shared some of the best memories of their family and their growing up. And that doesn't go away quickly. So being able to play off of that is important. Rule number 3, the seal rule. Many communities have these community seals. These are not what we should use to market. I'm sad to say that this is the actual seal of the village of Whitesboro, New York. They swear that this is a white settler engaging in a fun game of Indian wrestling. It is horrible. Unfortunately, somebody in the community brought up that maybe this is culturally insensitive, and the village decided that it should stay exactly like it is. So, another kind of side note message, maybe you don't always want to ask your public's opinion on everything. Sometimes you just know what right is. In this category, I always like to share a seal from my home state of South Carolina. This is one of the worst that I've ever come across. St. Stephen, South Carolina. You can tell that 6 people sat around this table, and each one of them got to come up with their own word. When your industry is clip art Christmas trees, look at how much fun recreation appears to be, right? But the thing that blows my mind is this is such a patriotic community that they included the head and legs of an American eagle with no wings. Couldn't figure out where to get those things to stick out. So again, in trying to say everything, oftentimes you end up saying nothing. Rule 4, the screwdriver rule, you must have the right tool for the job. In communities, we oftentimes confuse organizational identities and destination identities. We really look to colleges and universities to help clarify this. They have academic brands, and then they have athletic brands. Just like that, we have destination brands and we have organization brands. So our city governments and our Main Street organizations and our chambers, they have organization identities, but we also need to have those components that are truly shared by the community as a whole. And then finally, rule number 5, this is a big misbelief or disbelief, misconception. It doesn't have to be literal, and it doesn't have to be completely and totally self-explanatory. Missouri's got this really interesting thing going on where there are a lot of logos that look just like this. So we've got Kirksville, and then we went down from Kirksville to Monroe City. It's like, wow, those logos look really similar. In fact, they don't just look similar, they even look like the stars in the exact same place, right? So this was a logo that we created for Marceline, and it's very simple. It's a very, very simple logo. But break that apart for a second. There are a lot of stories in this. We've got this connection to true Americana. We've got in the flag icon, they're railroad tracks. The railroad is the thing that created the town. It's also the reason why Walt Disney ended up there. In the blue, there are 24 stars because Missouri is the 24th state. The corner of the blue is slightly overturned, paying tribute to the publishing and printing industry that helped to grow the community. And then that simple message, small town America, perfectly imagined, playing into the part that they are the inspiration for Main Street USA and the hometown of Walt Disney. So all these different stories that can be told from a single simple icon. That's something that is good, but you would never know all those nuances just by looking at it. When you go through a branding toolbox, there are 4 main components that we'll be sharing with you tomorrow. We'll be making recommendations on colors, typeface selection, graphics, and your approach to messaging. So I'm going to show you a couple examples and we'll get you out of here. The first, we saw Randy talk about Beaufort earlier, Beaufort, South Carolina. These are all the logos going on in the community, a lot of different stuff. Not bad logos, but absolutely no consistency between them. These are the events that just the Main Street organization does. So again, even in a single organization, no continuity whatsoever in how their graphic representation is. So they're sitting there complaining, nobody knows what we do. Guess what? You didn't make it easy for them to know what you do. But they do win points for having both a jogging shrimp and a sax playing crab. So the other thing that's interesting about Beaufort is right up the road from them, there is a Beaufort, North Carolina, except for they don't say Beaufort, they say Beaufort. So you literally have 2 communities with the exact same name in states with the same last name. It was amazing the stories that you hear of people that intended to be in Beaufort, North Carolina and ended up in Beaufort, South Carolina and vice versa. Hotels were a disaster, but you always have to think about this. Guess what? There's a lot of confusion that goes on anytime anybody talks about Rockaway Beach on the internet. Invariably, I'll be reading a thread about Rockaway Beach, Missouri, and then somebody will jump on there and say something that's completely and totally obvious about New York, you know? So being able to keep those separate and understand the confusion that could happen. There in Beaufort, we came up with a message system for them that actually included 3 different components. One was a moniker called Queen of the Sea Islands. This was a phrase that had been around for over 100 years. We're not the type that kills phrases like that, so we preserve that, even if it's not the most strategic phrase. We also came up with a positioning statement, which is established before Savannah, discovered before Charleston. In this corridor of history, we wanted to position them in a place of prominence between these 2 communities that are known globally for their history. And then the final message was this very simple phrase, historic retreat. And it tells 2 stories at the same time. It is a historic community that you can escape to and vacation to today. And the reason why it is preserved is during the Civil War, they heard Sherman was coming, and the quote is, they buried their silver and ran. So literally everybody scrammed. They retreated. They went home. They didn't fight. And Sherman came across this beautiful town that was completely empty, and he decided not to burn it. Instead, place camp there. So that's really where they come from. Being able to have, we rebranded and redesigned all their events. So now when you start to look at this stuff, it's using the same typefaces, using the same colors, starts to tie in together. You start to understand that. And then we introduced a messaging system. I love this one. By the time Savannah was founded, we were old enough to drink. So just kind of playing off some of the look and feel there in the region. Life's Like a Box of Chocolates and Forrest Gump got them here. They filmed a lot of Forrest Gump in Beaufort. And then when Tom Hanks went to Savannah to film the box of chocolates scene on the square, they originally gave him a box of Whitman sampler. And he's like, no way. You got to go back to Beaufort and you got to get a box from the chocolate tree. He had fallen in love with this local chocolate shop there. So literally the chocolates that he's eating in the movie were from downtown Beaufort. We created a system for C Street up in Springfield. Came in and they had all these different things going on. We created this kind of stylized icon for them, made sure that it worked and expanded out, had a lot of growth to it, showed how it would make its way into street banners, rebranded some of the events like Mardi Gras. They had a really great event called Loft Walk where they were highlighting the upper floor housing along C Street. But one of the coolest things that we did there was we highlighted the people in C Street. So we highlighted the me in commercial. So we took these photos of people that lived there, people that worked there. This great barista who was doing, cappuccino or latte art. You know, people working in the sandwich shops. These folks lived downtown. So gathering all this and kind of telling the story and making the human side of the district was really, really important. And then just showing how all those elements can tie together into storytelling. Two other examples that are my favorite. This is anywhere else in the country, this would be Buena Vista. But in Virginia, it's Buena Vista. They pronounce everything wrong on purpose to find out if you're a Yankee or not. In Buena Vista is 8 miles east of Lexington. Lexington is the home of Washington and Lee and Virginia Military Institute. If Lexington was a man, he would wear a bow tie. And if Buena Vista was a man, he would wear overalls. Blue collar from its creation, it was a master planned industrial community from the 1850s. So dramatically different from the land of tri-corner hats and red coats. So this is the original plot map from the 1800s of this master planned community right along the river. And you have to go back to their name. This doesn't mean great views. It doesn't mean spectacular views. It literally just means good views. It's like,
Well, if it was Buena, it would.
it's all right, you know. But one of the most interesting things there was they had this sign. Welcome to Buena Vista, 6,002 happy citizens and 3 old grouches. And this sign has been up since 1971. That's nuts. Almost 50 years that this thing has been up. And what we decided to do was we decided to take this and turn those 3 old grouches into the community ambassadors. So we started to really bring these people out and introduce the stories of the community through the eyes of the 3 old grouches. It was something that they really thought was pretty fun. And what was really funny about it was what they started to do was every year at the Christmas parade, they would select 3 people from the community to be the 3 old grouches. And at first I was like, oh, so they're going to have like a float? And like, no, we mic them up. And they criticize and complain every float that goes by. So, you know, you can imagine they just had a ton of fun with it, and it became part of their identity. And then with that comes, rip off and duplicate, little R&D, Fort Laramie, 250 good people and 6 sore heads. I saw you counting up trying to figure out, well, how many grouches do we actually have? And then the final example goes back to my home state of South Carolina, and this is Travelers Rest. Travelers Rest is a very, very interesting community. We worked with them about 15 years ago. I grew up right next to Travelers Rest. Now, nobody called them Travelers Rest. Everybody called them TR. And since we were right in the hills of the mountain, we were hill people, so they would say TR. We can go to TR. We can go up to TR. And at the time, there was no there. They had one business of any interest whatsoever, and it was an outfitter. But you had to drive through Travelers Rest to get to like 6 different state parks. It is where the mountains opened up, and it's where the adventure began. So I'm always preach against this idea of being a gateway to something, because you're kind of acknowledging we're not real good, but you're going to get to something good once you leave us. But I do love the idea of being a base camp, being the place that you decide to send out from and come back to. So the first phrase that came into my mind was get in your element. This is the place that you can go to get in your element. And being a nerd, that kind of took me back to chemistry class and the periodic table. So I created this icon with the TR based off of the element off the periodic table. And we launched the whole campaign with it starts with TR. And we just featured images and words like tradition, tranquil, travel, trails, trip, trek, trees, transported, trapped. And what was really funny about this was, as we were presenting it, we had a Ford dealer in the audience, and he goes, trucks start with TR. Oh, and, everybody laughed. But at the end of the meeting, all the businesses, all the little restaurants and little things in the community were like, got in these little groups and started talking about, well, what could my TR be? It was the simplicity that led to the buy-in. And now all of a sudden, because of that simple concept, you had the private sector excited about using their own resources to amplify your brand. So that's what I've got to share with you. Just remember, when it comes to promotion, your job is to go out and create vibrancy. You are truly using these tactics to stimulate pride, to create that momentum, and to show people that this is a vibrant place that people love and consumers buy. So with that, I'm going to stop.